Welcome to this InDesign import training. We'll cover a lot of topics in this session, so I recommend skipping to the parts that are most relevant to you. You can also click on the settings icon in the bottom right corner to change the video speed. Our end goal at Marq is to empower others to build on brand content. So we want to ultimately make it easy for your entire team to customize content and stay on brand. So InDesign import is one tool you can use to get your files into Marq, where you can then make your designs truly scalable by converting them to templates. As an overview of what we will cover in this video, we'll go over the end user experience, tips for setting up your account before importing, tips for working in InDesign, how to import your files and fix common errors, and then how to templatize. So first we have the end user experience. Hopefully it's helpful to see what Marq will look like from a non-designer perspective. So the user will follow these 4 steps. They'll log in, find a template, customize what they need, and then download, print, or export their file. So I'm going to show a quick example with a template that I have created. So I'm logged in as a user, and I want to find a specific template that I want to use. So I'm going to go over to the Templates tab. I can then use these tags and filters along the side, which are completely customizable for your entire account. So let's say I want to use a postcard. I can preview which one I want to use, see all the different page options, and then click Use Template. What's really nice is as a user, I can't mess up the set template. I'm always creating my own project from that template. Once I'm in my own project, I can go ahead and select different items like this heading. I can see that it's partially locked, so I can adjust the text here, while the logo has this fully locked icon, so there's nothing I need to do to change that or accidentally mess it up. I can click on this body text, also input my own, and so I can make my customizations. I can also see these tooltips or notes over on the side. So for example, this was put in by whoever created this template, so I know if I wanted to replace this image, all I have to do is double click. I can then find another photo from either like a shared folder, or I can just upload my own photo. So I can populate that. This is also a really great example of a tooltip on this back page. It says for additional back page options, click on the new page button on the left. So this is another great use case of what we call page templates. So if I wanted to insert a back page, I have an option to do an image and a heading, or I can just do one large image. So let's say this is one that I want to use instead. So I can go ahead and insert that into my project. And now I can go ahead and delete this second page. So now I have my new back page option. So hopefully this makes it just really easy and clear to see from an end user experience. Again, once I've finished all of my customizations, I can now either collaborate with somebody, share, download, or I can order prints. So that's the ideal end user experience from start to finish. With that in mind, we can switch back to more of the admin point of view. So before importing any of your InDesign files, I have 2 kind of main items that you should do. First one, you should set up any folders in My Projects, and then number 2, upload all of your brand assets. So now I'm logged in as an admin, and I went to My Projects. And kind of the folder structure that I would maybe set up is I could create a folder for the creative team. I can then set up a folder for in-progress files that I'm currently working on that I've imported, and then also move them over to this template ready folder. That way people can also take a look at it, make sure that everything's locked down correctly before converting it to a template. So I could just share this creative team folder with other designers on my team. That way we can kind of collaborate as we're setting up our templates. The next thing that you should also set up, again, is that Brand Assets tab. This will just make it very easy as you're doing your InDesign imports to have all of your brand assets in one place. So I recommend setting up all of your colors. You can also rename them, so you can kind of see I have teal and then digital. So I have all of my digital colors in a row, and then I could organize and put up all of my print or CMYK colors. With images, this is a very special section. So this is basically its own folder that's for what we call brand images. So I really would only put your main logos here. Everything else will go into the My Images tab. So if you wanted to create like a stock photo library, anything like that, that will go into My Images instead. You'll also upload your fonts, and we'll talk about this several times throughout the training today. But it's really essential. Upload any fonts that you think you've used in an InDesign file. That way, these are available for your entire team. You can also set up different text styles. This is more helpful as you're doing like a blank document. You can just easily drag and drop like a heading or a subheading text. Smart fields will also cover later on, and then you can go through different settings for end users. But for the most part, just uploading these 3 main items will make the InDesign import a lot more smooth. So now the fun part with tips with working in InDesign. So these are kind of a list of items of the most common things that I've seen. There's definitely a lot of features in InDesign. It's a very complex program. On the other side, Marq is meant to be super easy. Non-designers can also use it. And so obviously not everything from InDesign import is going to come in perfectly. So I'll just kind of go through each one of these and just kind of mention different tips and tricks for all of them. So the first one that I would do is to avoid EPS images if possible. The image types that Marq support are PNG, JPEG, and SVG files. Anything kind of outside of that, Marq will attempt to import those, but will convert them to a JPEG. So a lot of the time, if you're looking for like a transparent PDF, it's going to be converted to a JPEG, so it's not going to look most ideal. EPS files just won't import at all. So I usually just recommend opening them in either Illustrator, Photoshop, and exporting them either as a PNG or as a SVG if you're looking for more of that vector. Next, we have avoid colors outside of CMYK or RGB. So if you're using something like Pantone colors in your InDesign file, Marq doesn't have that support for anything outside of CMYK or RGB. So generally it'll convert those other colors to either black or white. So if you're starting to notice that on your file once you do an import, that a color is missing, it might be a good indicator that it's probably a Pantone color. I would also avoid paragraph styles, so as much as possible. And specifically, I have this part that's based on other styles. So I'm going to pull up InDesign and just show you really quickly an example of this. So for example, in this InDesign file, if I go ahead and select one of my text boxes, I can see kind of all the different paragraph styles that I'm using. So if you go into and you have a bunch set up, try to click on this pencil icon. And a lot of the time I've noticed that if you're doing some imports and you have a style based on like another style, as it's going more and more deep into those other styles, it's harder for Marq to know exactly what that font or style is. So if you recognize when you do an InDesign import and possibly the font says that it's Minion Pro is InDesign's kind of default font. So that's a good indicator that probably you have a paragraph style that for whatever reason Marq can't read. It might be because of that based on style error. Next, we have hyperlinks. So if you have any hyperlinks in InDesign, generally they're going to come into Marq without that hyperlink. So something to be aware of. A lot of the time in InDesign, I'll just go ahead and strip out those hyperlinks. That way, at least the text will import into Marq, and then I can re-add the hyperlink later. Page numbers will also not import. We have a page numbers feature in Marq. So that same text box will be there when it imports. You just have to reinsert the page numbers. Also, some things to keep in mind. Hidden layers will also show in Marq. So just because you have a layer hidden in InDesign, it's going to appear when you import it. Same thing with content outside of the page. So anything that's just kind of other layers on the outside of the page, those will also show up in Marq. Grouped layers will also be grouped. So something to kind of be aware of. And then gradients. This is something that's really important if your brand uses gradients a lot in your files. I'll just pull back up InDesign. There are two different kind of ways that you can add a gradient in InDesign. The first one is with this gradient swatch tool. The other one is with a gradient effect. So that would be over here on this side. If it's a gradient effect, or like a gradient feather, anything like this, those are not supported. So when they import, most likely it'll just come in as one single color rather than the gradient. So I would highly recommend trying to focus using on the gradient swatch tool as much as possible, because it will then map directly as you're doing your import. It's also very easy to add gradients directly in Marq. So if you don't want to change your design, you can do that directly once it's imported. So now let's talk about what you need to begin your import into Marq. So here's just a quick checklist item of everything that you need for that import. Luckily, it should be just a really quick step, because when you do an InDesign package, it'll include all 5 of these elements. So I'm going to open InDesign, and let's say I have my file that I want to package, and then I'll just go up to File, and then Package. It's towards the bottom. From here, I can go ahead and click Package, and you'll just want to double check that these items are also selected. So include IDML, include PDF, include fonts, and then also copy linked graphics. So that'll give you a nice folder with pretty much all of these different items, and then we'll use each one of those as we're doing our import. So let's do an InDesign import from start to finish. So once I'm logged in to Marq, I'm going to go to My Projects. I can also go into a specific folder. So maybe I want to go into In Progress. I can click now the InDesign button up here on the top. It will also ask me if I want to, put this file in a shared folder. I'm okay with that. It's going to ask you to convert your file to IDML. Luckily, we've already done that. So we'll click Continue and then Import, and then navigate to our file. And the one that I've chosen to do today is probably one of the hardest ones that I've ever seen. So this will hopefully be a good walkthrough of all of the different tools and features that you can use to make these edits for an import. So the first thing that will pop up once you do an import is you'll get this dialog box for uploading missing fonts and also missing images. This is probably the most important thing with doing an InDesign import. If I upload a font to this missing font section, technically it's only uploading the font to my Marq account. So if I want to templatize this later in the future, I need to give access to these 3 fonts to those members of my team. So this is why it's so important to upload your fonts to the brand assets section before doing your import. If you are doing an import like this, I just don't even upload the fonts to this section. I just immediately go back to brand assets and then upload the fonts. And if you package the InDesign file, you'll have that folder with all of the fonts. So I can go ahead and select all of these and then click Continue. So once these are uploaded, I like to double check that they're all in there. And most of the time, I'll just do a refresh of this file to make sure that I have all 3 of those fonts loaded into the system. That way, if for whatever reason I convert this to a template, no one's going to have any of those missing font errors. So to bring that dialog box back up, I'm going to highlight one of these red triangles and then just say like Find Missing Image. And then I'll get this box of like missing fonts and then missing images. So now I know the only missing font that I have is Minion Pro. And like I mentioned earlier, Minion Pro is Adobe InDesign's kind of like default font. So most likely I have some sort of paragraph style that didn't come in. Minion Pro isn't part of my brand font, so I'm not even going to upload it to the brand asset section. I'm not going to upload it here. I'm just going to manually change that font. So now I'm going to go to images. So I'm going to click Upload and then navigate to our links folder and highlight all of these. With this one, I didn't have an EPS like logo or anything, so all of these are going to upload. If you had an EPS image, again, that one's not going to upload. You'll have to then export it as a PNG, and then you can just drag and drop it directly over that like missing image icon. So for this part, since I have all of the images loaded, I'm going to click Continue. So the first thing that I focus on are these plus buttons, which should look very similar to you if you're familiar with InDesign. It just means you have a text box that's not quite big enough to fit all of that text. So generally I just kind of go through my entire document and just kind of expand all of these all at once. From there, I like to then open up either my InDesign file, or I can also open a PDF of my file, just so I can use it to compare back and forth. I like to have it on one monitor and one on the other, just so I can kind of see exactly what changes I need to make. So for this one, definitely a lot going on. The first one that I'm going to kind of see is I definitely need to adjust line spacing. So I need to make adjustments to those. And then also images. So I'll do the line spacing first, so I can go ahead and select my shape. And then over here, just go under spacing. We have lots of different settings, but for the most part, I'll just use this spacing and maybe set it as 1. I can then maybe adjust the size of this text box and then repeat this process for this other one. So again, just bring up that, make sure that it looks about the same, and that looks good to me. The next part are definitely these weird shapes that came in. This is a great example of gradients. So we had a gradient effect in InDesign. When I imported it, that gradient was lost and just converted to a single color. So if I actually move this out, I can see there's actually an image behind it. So I need to either re-add this gradient, which I find it just easier just to do directly in Marq rather than trying to do it in InDesign and having to upload it. So I'm going to click on this fill. Down here I can choose linear. And by default, Marq's going to put in 3 colors, so I can definitely ignore this more vibrant one. Here's that regular blue that was already applied, and then I have this darker one. So I'm going to set it to transparent, and then adjust the rotation here. So I think if I can get it exactly 90. And then I mean, on my original design, the blue only comes up so far, so I think just kind of adjusting it a little bit, maybe even repositioning it down a little bit lower. And then the next part that I have to fix is this image. And I definitely picked this file for a reason, because it has all of these different elements. With this image, we can see it's just rotated differently, and the image is just upside down. Most likely what happened is in InDesign, probably the image was flipped or rotated in a way, and then when it came into Marq, it just didn't maintain that same. So I can just go over here under Layout, under Rotate. I can flip my image, and pretty much that's all I have to do. And then here's kind of where I like to point out this image was created in a custom shape. So it's maintaining that shape, but in Marq we don't currently have the ability to rotate an image inside of a shape. So I can just rotate, obviously, the entire image, but I can't do both. I can't rotate the shape and the image. So I'll just show you one tool that you can use, and that would be, let's just add back this image. So I'm just going to go ahead and find this image and make sure that it doesn't drop on any other elements. And then I'm going to unlock the proportion so I can then adjust the size to fit accordingly. And then I can flip that image. And then I like to use the hotkey to send items backwards. All you have to do is hit Command and then one of the brackets on your keyboard. So I can just send it all the way back and then remove this kind of triangular shape. So with this one, it looks like there's also this white shape that I need to send back. And what I would do honestly for this one is I would just get creative and actually build shapes on top of my image. So I'm just going to go ahead, use one of our standard shapes and rotate this so I get basically that same effect that I had in InDesign, but just kind of in a different way. So I'm going to go ahead, put in that triangle, and now that matches exactly what I had. One of the kind of main benefits of this is you still have that square shape. So in the event your end users want to swap out this image, they can easily just drag and drop, make sure they don't place it on the gradient, but on the image itself, and they can swap it. Depending on your design, you might want to have more of a custom shape, and it may not be possible to recreate it using like other shapes on top of it, you can definitely save your file as like an SVG, add that as a custom shape, and then fill it with an image. So if you wanted to make whatever custom shape that you want to add to Marq, generally I use Illustrator, but wherever you can make an SVG file will work fine. So I can make this kind of more unique shape, and then I'll just go up to File, Save As, and then a SVG. And I'll just name this shape. And then I just set it as 1.1. Everything else should be good. And then now I can go back to my document. So to import an SVG, you actually can't drag and drop it. You do have to follow this same flow. So you have to go to My Images, then click on this little settings icon, and then underneath this little drop down below Upload is SVG files. So SVGs have to be uploaded in this way. So I'll just go ahead and find my SVG shape, and then now it's been added to the canvas. And what's really great is you can definitely like change the shape a little bit once it's in, and it's now been added. Maybe I have to make some adjustments of like the height and so forth. But what's really great, instead of changing the fill color, I can go ahead and change it to an image. So I can go ahead and select this image, and now that's added to my file. This is probably the biggest downside of SVGs, is drag and drop will not work for SVG files because it is a custom shape. So this one I can drag and drop, this one I cannot. So that's just kind of one of the downsides that you have to be aware of. If you just have one of those more custom shapes, then it's something like you can provide some instructions maybe on the side that explains like, oh, if you want to change out the image, you have to click on the fill to change it. Okay, so continuing on, we have this other shape, which is the same thing. There's also a gradient, so I just need to change that. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove, change this to transparent. The next tool that I think is really helpful is if I hover over this like question mark, it does say that I'm missing that font. So that's an instance of the Minion Pro, or where the paragraph style isn't coming through. So you have a couple of different options. I think probably the best option is to find a style that's similar to it already on your file. So for this one, it looks like it's about the same as this Equipping You with the Skills of Tomorrow. So this is one of my favorite features. I can right click on this one, go up to Copy Style, and then I can paste that style to this text box. So just right click, paste style, and then now that's populated. So the only change I have to do is maybe left a line, and now it's good. And then this one, it looks like I just have some line spacing, and that looks much, much better. This one maybe also some line spacing. And it ultimately comes down to the font, like how much line spacing you have to adjust. InDesign just measures line spacing very differently, and so it's hard to keep like a one static formula for every single font of how it would work. I could do the same thing with this image and just rotate it. And then a lot of the same elements are happening on this back page, where I just have to copy the style on these two paragraphs and then edit the gradients on both of these images. Another tip that I have is with this image. If you try to select the image, you can tell there's the shape in front of it. So I do have to kind of move it over to the side to then adjust this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip. If you ever need to change like the positioning of the image, you can also go over here to the crop and mask tool. So I can move this over. I think she's actually supposed to be flipped on the other side, but I think for this use case, that'll be fine. One thing to kind of point out from a user perspective, if you wanted kind of this like dark blue overlay effect in Marq on your template, but you still want to allow people to swap out the image, if I try to change out this image, technically I'm swapping out the image with that blue box. So now I have those two there. So what I usually recommend is you would actually set the opacity of this blue background to 100. You would send that all the way to the back. And then with this image, just make sure that it's positioned accordingly. And then on this one, you would adjust the opacity. So I could change this to, 51 or wherever it was at. So now if somebody wants to swap out the image, the top layer is that image. So they'll swap it out. It'll maintain that opacity. It'll still have that blue background. So just a simple tip that I would also recommend for something like that. Also, a kind of another important trick with images is to also change like the scale. So it won't work on every single image, but the more that you can do it, the better the user experience will be. So because I cropped this one in a certain way, it's labeled as a custom mask. However, almost always I'll want my images to be scale to fill for the most part. That way, no matter which image they replace it, it's going to be scale to fill. If for whatever reason you have a logo that people are swapping out, that would be a good use case of scale to fit. So no matter which logo they drag and drop, it's going to fit the entire logo. So something like this, maybe I change this one to scale to fill. That way, in the event they swap it out, it's just going to fill whatever image they're replacing it. I do get this question quite often. Should I create in InDesign? Which one's better, InDesign, or should I use Marq? And I really think it's up to you. As a designer, I know that, sometimes your creativity and your flow happens when you're more comfortable in a particular program. So if that's InDesign, then I'd probably just stick with that, do the import, and then you can create your templates. If you start to get comfortable in Marq and you start figuring out all the different tools, I honestly think it's easier to just create directly in Marq. That way you don't have to fix any of the weird errors or different adjustments that might have to be made from InDesign. That way you can just know exactly what tools are available in Marq. You can have it, lock everything down, and then create your template. So ultimately, it is up to you. I think over time, as you get more familiar, Marq is probably the better way to go. I also get the question of how much time should I spend doing an InDesign import? And generally, I think as you get more comfortable with the platform, you'll be able to import more quickly. But at the very beginning, I would say give yourself maybe about 5 to 10 minutes per page. So if you're doing a magazine template that has 20 pages, just kind of give yourself, 5 to 10 minutes per page in that file. And that kind of includes making sure that everything looks like your original InDesign file. And then that can also include adding notes, locking, smart fields, and basically just making it a template. If you're ever struggling on a certain InDesign file and it's just taking too long, or you're not finding how to fix a specific part, please email our support team. Their email is just support@marq.com. Send them a screenshot, the URL of the document that you've imported. You can even send us the InDesign file, and we can kind of walk through and give you some tips and tricks to help with that individual file. So let's say I have my file all completed. It looks exactly like my original PDF. I can now templatize this document. Here's a checklist of kind of all of the different items that I recommend doing as you're turning a document or a project into a template. So the first thing that you'll want to think about is, are there any notes that I can provide on this template that will make it easier for the end user? So I'll show you kind of how to go through that process. So there's a couple of different ways that you can add notes. The most simple is just to go ahead and just select whatever layer. You're going to right click and then just click add note. So I can go ahead and say double click to adjust this text box. So I can go ahead, increase the font size on this one so it's a little bit more legible. And now I have this icon which lives only on the editor. So if they download or print this file, it's not going to have that icon. It's not going to have those notes. So that's probably the easiest way. I kind of like how this option is not very, in your face. It's just kind of a nice, if people want to learn more, they can click on it. The other option is to put content over here in that gray area, which you saw at the very beginning of this training. So to do that, you actually have to turn on a setting for your account. And that setting will turn it on for all templates. So just kind of be aware that it is kind of a master global setting. So I'm going to go to the main Marq page. And then if you click on your name in the bottom left corner, as long as you're an admin, you'll have access to the admin settings. So I'll just go ahead and click that. And then the very last tile is called team settings. And this is the one where we'll select. And then down here, editor defaults, we'll just make sure to check show off-page content by default. So as long as you have that selected, go back to your document, refresh it, and then now you'll be able to drag and drop whatever text box you want over here to the side. And what's really great about using this off-page content is you can add things like arrows, you can add screenshots. You can just make it a little bit more obvious rather than just clicking on these items. Another really great use case is sometimes people get confused when they're downloading a file. So you can take a screenshot of this message box and let them know, like, oh, if you're sending it to this printer, make sure you set it to this color profile and allow for check marks or something. So just kind of making sure that you do that will make a big difference. Next, we have add smart fields. This is something I could go super in depth with, so I highly recommend referring to our Help Center articles about smart fields, but I'll just kind of do a just very high overview about how to use them and the different use cases. So the easiest way to kind of think about all the different types of smart fields is to go up here to Insert and then Smart Fields. So the first type is Profile. This means that it's pulling from whoever's currently logged into Marq. So because I'm using this template, it's going to pull in my address, my email, my full name. I could pull in my profile image, or it can also pull in a logo. So if somebody else is using it, obviously it'll pull in their information instead. So that is an option. Team is also a second type of smart field, and this is where I mentioned at the very beginning with the brand assets, you have an option for team smart fields. So this is applicable across all users. So no matter who logs in, it's going to be kind of standardized for everyone. So I put in this example of like a terms of service. So I can put in our copyright messaging at the very bottom of certain documents or postcards and flyers. And let's say, you know, I accidentally put in 2023 and it's supposed to be 2022. I can go ahead and update that, click save, and then that will update across all of my templates and all of my documents. So instead of having to update the terms of service in every single file, it's going to be updated just kind of in one central place. So this would be a great place to put terms of service, your like maybe company address, company phone number, maybe support email, anything that's just kind of standardized for most team members. The next kind of smart field is custom. So we treat custom the exact same as profile. Basically, just if you see one here that you need that we don't have, you can go ahead and add it as a custom smart field. So for example, department. We don't have that in our standard list. So if I go ahead and add department, that will then add it for all of the users as well. And then last but not least, we have what we call data automation. So you can connect any spreadsheet of data directly to your Marq account. In my example, I'm in real estate, so I connected my data of property listings. So I have just a big spreadsheet of all of the different properties that I'm currently selling or have sold. So I can input all of this information like number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. Some really great examples of like how to use data automation can be found in that Help Center article. And you can use it for like product spec sheets. You could use it for employee directories. If you're in like higher ed, you can definitely have it for like course catalogs, anything like that. You can input it as a spreadsheet and then you use that data automation directly in your specific template. To add a smart field to your file, it's probably easiest if you already have like some text on your project. So if I wanted to replace this email, with the email of whoever's using this specific template, I can just go ahead and highlight that info, then go up to Insert, Smart Fields, and then pull from the person's profile. So I can select email, and then now you can see it's populated these brackets indicating that it's pulling in some sort of data. So I could do the same thing with like this phone number, just highlight it, go up to Insert, Smart Fields, and then I can choose either cell phone, work phone, or maybe I want to make a custom one that says like department phone. So I could do that as well. So for this one, I would get a red pop-up message that just says that I have a smart field that needs to be populated. So in my account, I don't have a work phone entered in yet. So this is just kind of an idea of what it'll look like from an end user perspective. They'll go in, they'll put in their work phone. As soon as they click done, it'll save it to their profile and they won't have to re-enter their work phone. It'll just automatically save for future reference. So that's something that you'll want to do, is just kind of go through your file, see if there's any uses of smart fields that you want to add. I would definitely say this is optional, and a lot of our customers don't add data automation until people are kind of more familiar with how to use the platform. Next, we have locking. So this is probably everyone's favorite part, where you can just lock down all of the different layers on your file so that people stay on brand. So the best way is just to click up here on the top right, and then click on this pin icon. That way it saves your window and puts it on top. And for the most part, what I like to do is I'll just click on this gray area and just highlight everything on my file. And normally I just lock down everything. That way I can just individually go in and say, okay, I only want them to edit these specific text boxes, and I can unlock content. Content always refers to what's inside of the boundary box. So if people want to make adjustments to images, that would be inside of this boundary box. So I need to unlock content if I want them to be able to swap out those images. I can also get more in-depth with style. So I can click this little drop-down menu, and you'll also see that everything's kind of grayed out because I fully locked down style. But if I want to maybe unlock font face in the event I want to give people the ability to bold or italicize, I can kind of give them those options. Sometimes I also like to unlock font size. That way, if they have too much text or maybe too little, they can also adjust the font size. So that's something that I like to do. You can also choose whether or not you want to give them access to font color. When they go to choose a color, you can also limit them to only your brand colors. So as an admin, you'll see all of these, but just know from a user perspective, they'll only see the brand colors. Size and position, also pretty straightforward. That just means it's going to not be able to be moved around or resized. So keep that in mind with text boxes. A lot of the time before I lock a text box, I'll make sure that it's the maximum size that I want it to be. So the subheading, I'll maybe expand it. And some other tricks that I would like to do is just anticipate that the user might want to have a longer subheading. So maybe it'll actually be 2 lines. So I like to just make sure the text box is expanded, and I just like to type in some other text just so that I can make sure that spacing is all set. And then I like to also bottom align text. That way, in the event they do only have 1 line, it still looks pretty decent. So I can go ahead and resize this text box, and now I can lock down size and style. With images, even if you lock down size and position, they'll still have the option to crop or like zoom in on the image or anything like that. So that will be super helpful, but they won't be able to like fully move where the image is located on the file. Other lock options that you can do is by clicking on just the page itself. So probably the easiest way is to go over here to pages, click on page, and just make sure that nothing is selected. And then you'll get these page lock options. So you can prevent that specific page from being deleted. So with this trifold, I definitely don't want them to delete this page. I also don't want them to add additional layers to the file. So that's what adding content means. They can still replace images, but if they try to add like another text box, they'll get this error message that says that additional content can't be added. So I'm going to go back to pages. And then the last one is lock properties and settings. So that just makes sure they don't accidentally change the page size, the background color, or even the margins. So generally I kind of wait to the very end to do the page lock settings, just because sometimes it does, can be frustrating when you have prevent adding content locked and you try to go in and make some changes or add more layers and you can't. So I would repeat that process with the second page. And then the very last thing that I can also lock is if I click on the gray area, none of the pages are selected. I also have the option to prevent adding or deleting pages in general. So you'll see this is grayed out now. People can't add any pages. This is now fully locked and ready to go. If you're doing something more like that postcard example that I showed, where you want people to add different back page options, you'll definitely want to make sure that that is unlocked. That way people can select those different page layouts. And if you wanted to make a page layout, so let's say I have this cover version, and then I'm going to actually unlock this and duplicate it. Maybe I have a different option for this front page where it has 2 images on the front. So once I make that version, lock everything down, the last step would be to create a template from that page. So I'll just right click on that thumbnail, and then I can say this one is 2 images. Once I click save, it will then be added as an option under new page. What's also really great is as an admin, you can turn off the ability for users to create blank pages. So they won't even see this option. They would only see the ones that you formatted. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So underneath ad locking, that's where I kind of mentioned, you'll want to add those page templates, which may or may not be needed on every single template. And then the very last step is just to convert your file to a brand template. So I'm going to just double check that everything's saved and good to go. I'm going to actually remove that page since I have it saved as a page template. And then I'm going to go back to my projects. So I'll find where the file is saved. And then as an admin, I have the option to click on more and then convert to brand template. You'll also see we have this option to convert to a template. This is what we refer to as a personal template. So it stays in my projects. It doesn't automatically share it share it to the team or anything like that. It just kind of stays in your central account. So almost always you'll convert to a brand template. So I'll get this little message box to see if I want to make a copy and then convert that copy to a template. This is completely up to you. I usually don't make a copy just because I like my finished files to just live in the templates page. And obviously if I needed to make edits to that template, I can do so. So I'll just click next, and then I'll get all of my pre-made filters and tags. If you're just starting out, most likely you don't have any of these filters or tags. And I would just recommend just setting some up maybe at the beginning, or while you're converting your templates, you can just create a new filter or create a new category and just enter those in. So for this one, I want to say this is for all of my departments, and it's going to be a trifold print content. I can enter in a description if I would like to. I can also feature this specific template for whoever I'm sharing it to. If you're using ExpressDocs, which is one of our third-party printers, they have specific template keys that you can input. So if you're using that, you'll definitely know what this means. It helps when someone's going to order prints that they're ordering the right product through ExpressDocs. Below that, you have the share option. So right now I am sharing this brand template with the entire company, but I can also choose to just share this with one specific user. So I can just search for them, or I can also search for other groups that I've created. So maybe this is only relevant to this specific location, so I can share it with just them. Underneath print product, I also have the option to lock this to a specific print product. This could also be helpful because, especially with like an 8.5 by 11, there's plenty of different options that people can order. They can order like a flyer or something like a letterhead or a trifold. So for this one, I definitely want to find that trifold option. And there's tons of different ones on this account. So I can just make sure this one is, that trifold. So that way, when someone goes to order prints, they're only going to see that one specific option that I've pre-selected for them. And then last but not least, we have document approval. So depending on the specific project, you can designate whether or not it needs to be approved before someone can download or print that file. So on this one, maybe I'll set it as a no approval, and now I'm ready to go to save my file. So you'll see down here in the corner, it's converting the file. It has left my projects and is now populated over here into the templates page. So I can also sort this by created new to old, and then there is that new template that I've created. If you've added like a description or something like that, that would show up down here for people to see when they select that specific template. And then once they click use template, it'll make that copy for them. If you need to make any adjustments to this template, like maybe you want to unlock certain items or maybe lock things down even more, as an admin, you can click on those three dots and click Edit Brand Template. That will take you right back to this editor. And if you need to edit like how it's tagged or who it's shared with, you can just click Edit Brand Template Details. And that will bring up this same option to then edit the tags or any of these settings. So that's the entire process of taking an InDesign file, importing it to Marq, making adjustments, and then templatizing your file. Again, I'll just kind of as a reminder, if you have any questions, please refer to our Help Center article on InDesign import, or you can also email our support team, support@marq.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.